What if I told you that the woman crying in a prison cell today would be sipping champagne on a private jet tomorrow, watching her ex-husband's wedding burn to the ground? This isn't just another revenge story. This is about Madison Sterling, who lost everything: her marriage, her baby, her freedom to the ultimate betrayal. Her husband didn't just cheat, he framed her for federal crimes while marrying his mistress. But what he didn't know was that destroying Madison Sterling would create something far more dangerous: a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. By the time those wedding fireworks exploded, she wasn't just watching from above, she was the one holding the matches. Madison Sterling had always believed that good things came to those who worked hard and played fair. Standing in the doorway of her own bedroom, watching her husband of 5 years have sex with another woman on the sheets she had picked out for their anniversary, she realized how catastrophically wrong she had been. The baby shower decorations were still hanging downstairs. Pink and blue balloons, a cake shaped like a teddy bear, gifts from friends who had just left an hour ago. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was 4 months pregnant, and discovering her marriage was a lie on the same day everyone had celebrated their coming child. Ryan Cross didn't even have the decency to look ashamed when he saw her. He simply pulled away from the blonde woman beneath him and reached for his boxers with the same casual efficiency he used to put on his $1,000 suits. "Maddie," he said, his voice carrying that patronizing tone she had learned to hate. "We need to talk." The woman on the bed was Sienna Vale, Ryan's business development partner at the law firm. Maddie had met her dozens of times at company events. She was 26, ambitious, and had always been a little too interested in Ryan's cases. Now she was pulling Maddie's silk robe around her shoulders like she owned it. "How long?" Maddie's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Does it matter?" Ryan was already moving into damage control mode, the same way he handled difficult clients. "Look, this isn't how I wanted you to find out, but maybe it's better this way. We can be adults about this." Sienna finally spoke, her voice honey-sweet with just enough fake sympathy to make Maddie's stomach turn. "Madison, I know this is hard, but Ryan and I have something real. We didn't plan for it to happen, but sometimes love just finds a way." "Love?" Maddie almost laughed. She had worked her way up from a trailer park in Detroit to a corner office in Manhattan. She had put Ryan through law school when his trust fund ran dry temporarily. She had built their life brick by brick while he networked and played golf with his Boston elite friends. "Get out," Maddie said quietly. "Both of you, get out of my house." "Actually," Ryan said, straightening his tie, "we need to discuss that. This house is in my family trust. Technically, you're the one who needs to leave." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. 5 years of marriage, and she was learning that the home she had decorated, the life she had built, none of it had ever really been hers. Sienna was already getting dressed, moving through Maddie's bedroom like she had done it 100 times before. And maybe she had. How long had this been going on? How many times had they laughed at her behind her back? "I'm pregnant," Maddie said, one hand moving instinctively to her belly. "We're having a baby." Ryan's expression didn't change. "I know, and maybe this isn't the right timing for that." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that bringing a child into this situation wouldn't be fair to anyone, including the child." Sienna placed a gentle hand on Ryan's arm. "Baby, maybe we should give Madison some time to process everything." "Baby." She called him baby. In Maddie's bedroom, wearing Maddie's robe, discussing Maddie's pregnancy like it was an inconvenient business meeting. 20 minutes later, Maddie was alone in the house that wasn't hers, surrounded by baby shower gifts for a child her husband didn't want, trying to figure out how her life had become a country song cliché. She walked downstairs to the living room, past the congratulations cards and pink gift bags, and poured herself a glass of water with shaking hands. The baby kicked for the first time that day, a tiny flutter that should have been magical. Instead, it felt like a reminder of how alone she really was. The front door opened and Ryan walked back in, alone this time. "I want you to know that I never meant for it to happen this way," he said. "But Sienna and we're good together. We want the same things." "And what do we want?" Maddie asked. He looked around the room, at the expensive furniture and the art they had collected together, like he was cataloging assets. "We want different lives, Maddie. You've always been so focused on work, on building something. I need someone who can be a partner in every sense of the word." It was almost funny. She had worked 60-hour weeks to support his career, had attended every firm party and charity gala, had played the perfect lawyer's wife while building her own successful marketing consultancy. But somehow, she wasn't enough of a partner. "I'll make this easy for you," Ryan continued. "We can handle this quietly, civilized. No need for drama or lawyers." Looking at him standing in their living room, still adjusting his cufflinks like he was late for a meeting, Maddie realized she had never really known her husband at all. The man she had fallen in love with in law school, the one who had promised to build a life with her, had been a carefully constructed fiction. "Get out," she said again. This time, he listened. The next morning, Maddie discovered that Ryan's betrayal was far more comprehensive than a simple affair. While she had been planning nurseries and baby names, he had been systematically dismantling their life together. Their joint checking account had been emptied except for a balance of $300. The savings account that had contained their emergency fund showed a transfer of $50,000 to an account she didn't recognize. When she called their financial advisor, she learned that Ryan had been moving assets for months. "Mrs. Cross, I assumed you were aware of these transactions," the advisor said, his voice carefully neutral. "Your husband said you were restructuring for tax purposes." Restructuring. It was such a clean, business-like word for theft. Maddie sat in her kitchen, surrounded by coffee cups and financial statements, trying to piece together the scope of Ryan's deception. Every paper she found revealed another layer of betrayal. The prenuptial agreement she had signed in a haze of love and trust was ironclad. The house, the cars, even the art they had bought together. Everything was protected by legal structures designed to keep her from claiming anything. Her phone rang. It was her assistant from the marketing firm. "Madison, I'm so sorry to bother you on your day off, but there's been a problem with the Henderson account. They're saying there was a breach of confidentiality." Henderson Industries was Maddie's biggest client, a manufacturing company that had trusted her with sensitive information about their upcoming merger. She had been working on their rebranding campaign for months. "What kind of breach?" Maddie asked, though she was already starting to understand. "They're saying someone leaked details about their acquisition strategy to Cromwell Corp. The CEO is furious. He wants to meet with you first thing Monday morning." Cromwell Corp was one of Ryan's clients. Maddie hung up the phone and stared at the financial papers scattered across her kitchen table. This wasn't just about an affair or even about money. This was about the systematic destruction of everything she had built. Ryan hadn't just been cheating on her with Sienna. He had been using Sienna to steal information from Maddie's business, feeding insider details to his own clients. She thought about all the times Sienna had been at company events, all the casual conversations about Maddie's work, all the innocent questions about client strategies. How long had they been planning this? The baby kicked again, stronger this time, and Maddie felt a surge of protective rage that surprised her with its intensity. They weren't just destroying her life, they were threatening her child's future. She spent the weekend gathering evidence, printing emails, copying files, trying to build a case. By Sunday night, she had a stack of documents that painted a clear picture of corporate espionage and financial fraud. She had Ryan and Sienna dead to rights. Monday morning, she walked into her lawyer's office with a briefcase full of evidence and a plan for justice. 3 hours later, she walked out unemployed. The meeting with Henderson Industries had been a massacre. They not only fired her, they threatened to sue for damages. Somehow, Ryan's team had been faster and smarter. They had painted Maddie as a disgruntled wife trying to frame her innocent husband. They had documentation that made it look like she had been the one feeding information to competitors. Her own marketing firm panicked about liability, terminated her contract immediately. Standing on the sidewalk outside her former office, holding a cardboard box of personal items, Maddie realized she had underestimated her opponent. Ryan wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a predator who had been planning this for months, maybe years. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "I'm sorry it had to be this way. The house will be listed tomorrow. I'll give you 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live." 2 weeks. She was 4 months pregnant, unemployed, and had 2 weeks to find a new place to live with $300 to her name. That night, she sat in the house that had never really been hers, surrounded by baby shower gifts she couldn't afford to keep, and called the one person who had known her before she became Mrs. Ryan Cross. Jack Morrison's office. "It's Maddie Sterling," she said, using her maiden name for the first time in 5 years. "I need to talk to Jack." 6 months later, Maddie was living in her car. The cascade of disasters that followed her divorce had been swift and merciless. Without a job or references, she couldn't qualify for an apartment lease. The few friends she had thought were hers turned out to be Ryan's friends first. Her family back in Detroit was struggling with their own problems and couldn't help. The miscarriage had happened on a Tuesday in March. She was alone in a free clinic, 20 weeks pregnant, when the cramping started. By the time she reached the emergency room, it was too late. The stress, the lawyer said. Sometimes these things just happen. Ryan sent flowers to the hospital. The card read, "My condolences. This is probably for the best." She had wanted to throw them away, but the nurses convinced her to keep them. "Flowers are expensive," one of them said kindly. "You can always change the meaning." Now she was parked outside a Starbucks in Westchester, using their Wi-Fi to search for jobs that didn't exist and apartments she couldn't afford. The pregnancy weight was gone, but she felt hollow in a way that had nothing to do with physical appearance. Her phone had 17 missed calls from debt collectors. Her credit cards were maxed out from legal fees. The lawyer she had hired to fight Ryan's financial manipulations had turned out to be incompetent, possibly corrupt. Every door she tried to open led to another hallway of locked doors. This was what rock bottom felt like. Not dramatic or cinematic, just a slow, grinding erosion of dignity and hope until you were reduced to washing your hair in Starbucks bathrooms and sleeping in a Honda Civic that would probably be repossessed next week. She was reading job listings on her laptop when someone tapped on her passenger window. Jack Morrison looked exactly the same as he had in college, except now he was wearing a suit that probably cost more than her car. His dark hair was shorter, his jaw sharper, but he still had the same concerned expression he'd worn when he found her crying in the library during finals week freshman year. "Maddie, Jesus, what are you doing here?" She rolled down the window, trying to summon some dignity. "Just taking care of some business." Jack's eyes took in the pillows in her back seat, the bags of clothes, the empty coffee cups. His expression shifted from surprise to something that looked like fury. "How long have you been living in your car?" I'm not living in my car. She lied. I'm just between apartments. Bullshit. Jack opened the passenger door and slid into the seat beside her. Talk to me. What happened with Ryan? For a moment, she considered lying again, protecting her pride with stories about temporary setbacks and new opportunities. But sitting next to Jack, who had known her when she was 19 and fearless and thought she could change the world, the truth came spilling out. She told him about the affair, about the financial manipulation, about losing her job and her home and her baby. She told him about the lawyers who had taken her money and accomplished nothing, about the friends who had disappeared, about waking up every morning with nowhere to go and nothing to do. Jack listened without interrupting, his jaw getting tighter with every detail. "Where is Ryan now?" he asked when she finished. "Married. They had a ceremony in the Hamptons last month. It made the society pages. And Sienna. She's working at a bigger firm now. Apparently, her inside information about my clients made her very valuable." Jack was quiet for a long moment, staring out the windshield at the strip mall parking lot. "I have a proposition," he said finally. "Come work for me." Maddie almost laughed. "Jack, I appreciate the offer, but I can't take charity." "It's not charity. It's business." He turned to face her, and she saw something calculating in his expression. "I'm expanding Morrison Tech into marketing and brand development. I need someone who understands how to build a brand from nothing, someone who knows what it's like to fight for every inch of ground, someone who's been tested." "I've been more than tested. I've been destroyed." "Exactly. That's what makes you valuable." She stared at him, trying to read his intentions. Jack Morrison was now worth $3 billion. His tech company had revolutionized data analytics for Fortune 500 companies. He didn't need to rescue old friends from parking lots. "What's the catch?" she asked. "No catch. But I do have a condition." His voice got very quiet. "I want you to help me destroy Ryan Cross." The words hung in the air between them like a proposition and a promise. "I tried that already," Maddie said. "He's smarter than I am, better connected. He has resources I can't compete with." "He has resources," Jack agreed. "But he doesn't have me, and he definitely doesn't have you at your full potential." Maddie thought about Ryan and Sienna living in their penthouse apartment, attending charity galas, building their empire on the ruins of her life. She thought about the baby she had lost, the career she had built and lost, the 5 years of her life that had been reduced to a footnote in someone else's success story. "What did you have in mind?" she asked. Jack smiled, and for the first time in months, Maddie felt something other than despair. Hope was a dangerous thing, but sometimes it was the only thing left. Federal prison was not what Maddie had expected. The minimum security facility in Connecticut looked more like a college campus than a jail. Low brick buildings, manicured lawns, women in khaki uniforms who could have been students except for the defeat in their eyes. Maddie had been sentenced to 18 months for financial fraud. The charges had been carefully crafted by Ryan's legal team to paint her as the mastermind behind a client information selling scheme. The evidence had been circumstantial but convincing, built on a foundation of her legitimate access to sensitive business information and her suspicious behavior after the divorce. Jack had tried to help, hiring the best criminal defense attorneys money could buy, but the case against her had been too well constructed. Ryan and Sienna had been planning this for years, building a paper trail that led directly to Maddie's door. "The beautiful thing about framing someone," Ryan had said during one of the depositions, his voice filled with mock sympathy, "is that you use their own strengths against them." Maddie was so good at her job, so trusted by her clients, that when we suggested she was selling their secrets, it seemed plausible. The worst part was that some of it was true. She had shared client information with Ryan during their marriage, casual conversations over dinner about her work challenges. She had never imagined he was building a file against her. Now she was sitting in a prison library, reading legal textbooks and trying to understand how she had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered. First time, Maddie looked up to see a woman in her 50s with graying hair and intelligent eyes. She looked like she should be teaching at a university, not serving time for white-collar crimes. "Is it that obvious? You still look angry. That fades after a few months." The woman sat down across from her. "I'm Sandra Walsh. I used to be a forensic accountant before my business partner decided I was a liability." "Maddie Sterling. I used to be a lot of things." Sandra gestured to the legal books scattered across the table. "Studying law good. Knowledge is the only currency that matters in here." Over the following weeks, Sandra became Maddie's unofficial mentor. She had been convicted of embezzling from the accounting firm she had built from scratch, framed by her partner when she discovered he was stealing from clients. "The thing about powerful men," Sandra said during one of their walks around the exercise yard, "is that they assume women are too emotional to be truly dangerous. They see our anger and think it makes us weak. They don't realize that anger, properly channeled, is the most powerful force in the world." Sandra taught Maddie things that no law school covered: how to trace hidden assets, how to identify financial fraud patterns, how to build airtight cases that couldn't be dismissed or manipulated. "Your husband made one crucial mistake," Sandra said after reviewing the details of Maddie's case. "He assumed you would stay destroyed. He didn't plan for what happens when you get back up." Maddie spent her days in the library and her evenings talking to Sandra about strategy. She learned about corporate espionage, money laundering, and the sophisticated financial crimes that men like Ryan committed every day without consequence. Jack visited every week, bringing updates from the outside world and building their plan. "Ryan's gotten careless," he told her during one visit. "Success has made him overconfident. He and Sienna are handling bigger clients now, taking bigger risks. They think they're untouchable." "Are they?" Maddie asked. "Nobody's untouchable. We just need to be smarter than they are." The plan they developed was elegant in its simplicity. Jack's company would pose as a potential client for Ryan's firm, offering them the kind of high-stakes international deal that would be impossible to resist. They would document everything, build an airtight case of actual criminal behavior, and then present it to federal prosecutors. "The beauty of it," Sandra said when Maddie explained the strategy, "is that you're not trying to frame them for something they didn't do. You're just giving them enough rope to hang themselves with what they're already doing." Maddie served 14 months of her 18-month sentence, released early for good behavior and overcrowding. When she walked out of prison, she was carrying a business degree she had earned through correspondence courses, a detailed understanding of financial crime investigation, and a network of contacts who understood better than anyone how the system really worked. Jack was waiting for her outside the gates in a car that cost more than most people's houses. "Ready to go to work?" he asked. Maddie looked back at the prison one last time, thinking about Sandra and the other women inside who had been destroyed by men who thought they were expendable. "I've been ready for 14 months, she said. The war was about to begin. Morrison Tech's headquarters occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in Manhattan, all clean lines and expensive minimalism. Maddie's office had a view of Central Park and furniture that cost more than her former annual salary. It felt surreal, sitting behind a mahogany desk after sleeping in prison bunks for over a year. But Jack hadn't hired her for her comfort. He had hired her for her hunger. "Ryan's firm has been expanding aggressively," Jack explained during their first strategy meeting. "They're handling international clients now, doing deals that would have been way above their league 5 years ago." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were photographs, financial records, and surveillance reports that painted a picture of Ryan and Sienna's rise to power. "How did you get all this?" Maddie asked. "I'm worth $3 billion, Maddie. Information is easy to buy when you have unlimited resources." The folder revealed that Ryan and Sienna's marriage was more than romantic. They had formed a consulting company together, specializing in international business development. Their client list included several corporations with questionable reputations and business practices that skirted the edge of legality. "They're not just stealing client information anymore," Jack continued. "They're facilitating money laundering for overseas clients, hiding assets, helping corporations avoid federal regulations. It's sophisticated and highly illegal." Maddie studied the financial records, recognizing patterns that Sandra had taught her to spot. Shell companies, offshore accounts, transactions designed to obscure the source and destination of large amounts of money. "This is genius," she said, "and incredibly stupid. These transactions leave paper trails that any decent forensic accountant could follow. That's where you come in." Jack's plan was elegant. Morrison Tech would approach Ryan's firm with a proposal for a massive international deal, supposedly helping Jack expand his business into emerging markets. The deal would be complex enough to require the kind of financial maneuvering that Ryan and Sienna specialized in, and lucrative enough to make them abandon caution. "We'll wire them money to hold an escrow," Jack explained. "Legitimate money, from legitimate sources. But we'll ask them to move it through their usual channels to avoid certain tax implications. When they use their standard money laundering techniques on our funds, we'll have them on federal crimes with crystal clear evidence. And the FBI. I have contacts. When we present them with a case this clean, with this much documentation, they'll have no choice but to act." It took 3 months to set up the operation. Maddie worked 18-hour days, building fake corporate structures, creating believable business plans, and developing relationships with Ryan's firm that looked legitimate from the outside. The hardest part was the first phone call. "Crossan Associates, this is Ryan." Hearing his voice after 18 months was like a physical blow, calm, confident, completely unaware that his ex-wife was about to destroy him. "Mr. Cross, this is Sarah Martinez from Morrison Tech. We're interested in discussing some international business development opportunities." She had changed her name for the operation, changed her voice, become someone else entirely. Ryan had no idea who he was talking to. "Morrison Tech, the data analytics company. I'd be very interested in that conversation." Of course he would be. Jack Morrison's business was exactly the kind of high-profile client that could take Ryan's firm to the next level. They met the following week at a restaurant in Midtown. Maddie watched from across the street as Ryan and Sienna walked into the building, both of them dressed for success and radiating confidence. Sienna had changed since the last time Maddie had seen her. Her hair was shorter, more sophisticated. Her clothes were expensive without being flashy. She moved like a woman who had never doubted her place in the world. Ryan looked exactly the same. Handsome, polished, carrying himself like he owned every room he entered. Watching them together, Maddie felt the old rage rising in her chest. They had built their success on the ruins of her life, and they didn't even have the decency to look haunted by it. Jack's representative, an actor hired for the occasion, presented them with a deal that was almost too good to be true. $50 million in international expansion funding, with complex tax and regulatory requirements that would necessitate creative financial solutions. "This is exactly the kind of opportunity we've been positioning ourselves for," Ryan said, according to the recording Jack's team made of the meeting. "Sienna has developed some innovative approaches to international fund management that could be perfect for this situation." Innovative approaches. That was one way to describe money laundering. They took the bait completely. Within a week, Ryan's firm had agreed to handle the financial logistics for Morrison Tech's international expansion, including moving funds through offshore accounts and shell corporations to minimize tax exposure. "They think they're playing me," Jack said after reviewing the contracts. "They have no idea they're walking into a trap that's been 18 months in the making." Maddie stared at the surveillance photos of Ryan and Sienna leaving their office, probably celebrating their good fortune. In 6 weeks, they would transfer $50 million through channels that would document their money laundering operation in exhaustive detail. In 6 weeks, it would finally be over. But as she looked at the photos, Maddie realized something that surprised her. She didn't feel victorious. She felt empty. Revenge, it turned out, was a lot like prison. Necessary, maybe even justified, but ultimately just another kind of cage. The wire transfers began on a Monday morning in November. Maddie sat in Morrison Tech's conference room, surrounded by monitors displaying financial transactions in real time. Each movement of money through Ryan and Sienna's network was being recorded, documented, and logged by federal investigators. "There goes the first 10 million, Jack said, pointing to a screen showing funds moving from Morrison Tech's account to a bank in the Cayman Islands. Exactly the route our intelligence suggested they would use. Special Agent Sarah Chen of the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit was watching from the corner of the room. She was younger than Maddie had expected, with sharp eyes and the kind of focused intensity that came from years of building cases against people who thought they were too smart to get caught. "This is textbook money laundering," Agent Chen said, making notes as the transfers continued. "They're not even trying to hide it. The confidence is remarkable." Over the course of the week, Ryan and Sienna moved $50 million through a network of shell companies, offshore accounts, and foreign banks. Each transaction was designed to obscure the money's origin and destination, exactly the kind of financial manipulation that federal prosecutors love to present to juries. "They're better at this than I thought," Maddie admitted, watching the complexity of the operation unfold. "This isn't amateur hour." "No," Agent Chen agreed. "This is a sophisticated criminal enterprise. They've obviously been doing this for years." By Friday, all $50 million had been successfully laundered through Ryan and Sienna's network and deposited into accounts that Morrison Tech could access through their supposed international subsidiaries. From a client's perspective, the operation had been flawless. From a legal perspective, it was a federal prosecutor's dream. "We have them on money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy charges," Agent Chen said, reviewing the evidence. "The documentation is perfect. This case will be impossible to defend." Jack looked at Maddie across the conference table. "How does it feel?" "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "Ask me after they're arrested." They didn't have to wait long. The FBI raid happened the following Monday at 7 in the morning. Maddie watched from Jack's office as federal agents swarmed the building that housed Cross and Associates. From 30 floors up, the agents looked like ants, but she could see them leading people out in handcuffs. Her phone rang. It was Agent Chen. "We have them both," she said. "Ryan Cross and Sienna Vale are in federal custody. The arraignment is scheduled for Thursday." Maddie hung up the phone and realized her hands were shaking. "It's done," she told Jack. He poured 2 glasses of champagne and handed her one. "To justice. To justice," she agreed, but the word felt strange in her mouth. The arraignment was everything Maddie had imagined. Ryan and Sienna, dressed in orange jumpsuits, standing before a federal judge while prosecutors read charges that could put them in prison for decades: money laundering in the first degree, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit financial crimes. The list went on and on. Ryan's lawyer, one of the best criminal defense attorneys in the city, tried to argue for bail, but the judge wasn't having it. The defendants have demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of international financial systems and have access to funds in multiple countries, the judge said. Bail is denied. Maddie watched from the gallery as Ryan and Sienna were led away in handcuffs. For just a moment, Ryan turned and scanned the courtroom. His eyes found hers across the crowded room. The recognition was instantaneous. Shock, then understanding, then something that looked almost like respect. He nodded once, a tiny acknowledgement of defeat, before the bailiff led him away. Outside the courthouse, reporters were already gathering. The story was too good to ignore. Prominent lawyer and his wife arrested in sophisticated money laundering scheme, brought down by their own greed and an elaborate FBI sting operation. How does it feel to see justice served? One reporter asked Maddie as she walked down the courthouse steps. It feels like the beginning, she said. That night, she and Jack had dinner at the restaurant where Ryan and Sienna had first taken the bait for their trap. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. So what's next? Jack asked over dessert. I don't know, Maddie said. For 18 months, my entire life has been focused on this moment. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do now. You could stay with Morrison Tech, build something new. Maybe. She looked around the restaurant, remembering the surveillance photos of Ryan and Sienna celebrating their good fortune in this same room. Or maybe I need to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to destroy someone else. Jack nodded. For what it's worth, I think you're going to be remarkable. I already am remarkable, Maddie said, and for the first time, she actually believed it. The next morning, she woke up in her apartment, overlooking Central Park, with no immediate plans for revenge. It was a strange feeling, like waking up in a foreign country where she didn't speak the language. But it was also, she realized, the first day of the rest of her life. Ryan and Sienna's wedding had been planned before their arrest. When they were released on bail pending appeal, they decided to go through with it anyway. It's a show of confidence, their lawyer had advised, acting like people who have nothing to hide. The wedding was scheduled for New Year's Eve at the Plaza Hotel, a lavish affair that would cost more than most people made in a year. 300 guests, a 12-piece orchestra, and fireworks over Central Park at midnight. Maddie learned about it through the society pages, which covered the event like it was a royal wedding instead of the union of two federal criminals. They're really going through with it? Jack asked when she showed him the article. Apparently, the reporter calls it a defiant celebration of love in the face of adversity. That's one way to put it. Maddie stared at the engagement photos accompanying the article, Ryan and Sienna on the beach in the Hamptons, both of them laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. The ring on Sienna's finger was enormous, probably cost more than Maddie's car. I want to go, she said suddenly. To the wedding. Maddie, that's a terrible idea. No, it's perfect. They're having their big moment, their celebration. I want to be there. Jack looked at her like she had lost her mind. Why would you want to watch them get married? Because I want to see their faces when they realize I'm there. I want them to know that while they're celebrating, I'm the one who destroyed their lives. It took Jack 3 days to talk her out of crashing the wedding. It took him another week to talk her into something much better. If you really want to make a statement, he said, why don't we make one that matters? The plan he proposed was audacious, even by Jack's standards. On the night of Ryan and Sienna's wedding, they would host their own party. Not just any party, but a celebration that would overshadow everything happening at the plaza. I'll rent out the Rainbow Room, Jack said. We'll invite everyone who matters in business, politics, and media. We'll announce Morrison Tech's expansion into international markets, your role as head of global development, and our new charitable foundation for women who've been victims of financial crimes. And the timing, midnight, right when they're exchanging vows, will be making headlines. The invitation list was a who's who of New York power brokers, politicians, CEOs, celebrities, journalists, people who could make or break reputations with a single conversation. The message is simple, Jack explained. While Ryan and Sienna are hiding behind lawyers and appeals, you're building an empire. While they're celebrating their fake marriage, you're creating something that will outlast both of them. Maddie spent weeks preparing for the event. She hired a stylist, a speech coach, and a public relations firm that specialized in reputation management. This wasn't just a party. It was a coming out event for the woman she had become. The dress was a custom creation by a designer who usually dressed senators' wives and Fortune 500 CEOs. Midnight blue silk that fit like armor, with a neckline that suggested power rather than seduction. "You look like you could buy and sell half the people in this room," Jack said when he saw her. "That's because I can." The Rainbow Room had been transformed into something that looked like a cross between a corporate boardroom and a fairy tale. Ice sculptures, champagne fountains, and enough flowers to stock a small country. The guest list read like a Fortune 500 directory. At 11:45, as Ryan and Sienna were presumably preparing to exchange vows at the plaza, Maddie took the stage at the Rainbow Room. "5 years ago," she began, "I thought my life was over. I had lost my marriage, my career, my home, and my child. I was living in my car, convinced that I had nothing left to offer the world." The room was completely silent. 300 of the most powerful people in New York hanging on every word. "Tonight, I want to talk about what it means to rebuild, not just from failure, but from betrayal, not just from loss, but from the kind of destruction that makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself." She talked about the importance of giving women second chances, about creating opportunities for people who had been written off by society. She announced the Morrison Foundation's $50 million commitment to supporting women entrepreneurs who had been victims of financial crimes. "We're not just offering money," she said. "We're offering something more valuable. We're offering the chance to prove that your worst moment doesn't define your potential." The applause was thunderous, but the real victory came 20 minutes later, when the first news alerts started appearing on people's phones. Morrison Tech announces major expansion, commits $50 million to Women's Foundation. Former prison inmate becomes head of global development for billion-dollar company. Maddie Sterling's remarkable comeback story overshadows New Year's Eve wedding. By the time Ryan and Sienna were cutting their wedding cake, the story of their celebration had been completely overshadowed by Maddie's triumph. At midnight, as fireworks exploded over Central Park, visible through the Rainbow Room's floor-to-ceiling windows, Maddie stood at the center of a crowd of the most influential people in the country. She thought about Ryan and Sienna, probably watching the same fireworks from their wedding reception, probably just beginning to understand that their big night had been upstaged by the woman they thought they had destroyed. "How does it feel?" Jack asked, appearing at her side with 2 glasses of champagne. "Like justice," Maddie said. "Finally." The irony wasn't lost on her that she was standing in a room full of people who wanted to invest in her future, while 20 blocks away, Ryan and Sienna were surrounded by people who would probably abandon them the moment their legal troubles became too inconvenient. Success, it turned out, was the best revenge after all. The letter arrived on a Wednesday morning in February, delivered by courier to Maddie's office at Morrison Tech. "Madison Sterling." It read, "I think it's time we talked. Ryan Cross." Inside the envelope was a visitor's pass for the federal detention center where Ryan was being held pending trial. His appeal had been denied, And he was facing 25 years in federal prison. "You don't have to go," Jack said when she showed him the letter. "You don't owe him anything." "I know, but I want to hear what he has to say." The detention center was a concrete fortress in Lower Manhattan, all razor wire and metal detectors. Maddie had to surrender her phone, her purse, and her jewelry before being escorted to a visiting room that looked like a cafeteria with reinforced windows. Ryan appeared 5 minutes later, wearing an orange jumpsuit that made his skin look sallow. He had lost weight, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there during their marriage. "You look good," he said, sitting down across from her at a metal table. "Success suits you. What do you want, Ryan?" "I want to apologize." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. "You want to apologize," Maddie repeated. "For what? Exactly all of it. The affair, the theft, the frame job, everything." "That's very noble of you. A little late, but noble." Ryan leaned forward, and for a moment, she saw a flash of the man she had once loved. Vulnerable, almost desperate. "I know you probably won't believe this, but I never meant for it to go as far as it did. The affair with Sienna, that was just, I don't know, weakness. But the rest of it, that was her idea." "So now you're blaming Sienna." "I'm not blaming anyone. I'm taking responsibility. But I want you to know that the plan to frame you, to destroy your career, that wasn't something I wanted to do." Maddie laughed, a sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "You expect me to believe that you were just an innocent victim in all this? No. I was weak and selfish and stupid. But I wasn't evil, not until I met her. Tell me about Sienna." Ryan was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "She's not who you think she is. Her real name is Sarah Vance. She's been running cons like this for years, targeting successful men in law firms and investment companies. I wasn't her first victim. Victim? You were her victim. I know how it sounds, but she studied me for months before we started the affair. She knew about my marriage problems, my financial insecurities, my relationship with my father. She knew exactly which buttons to push." Maddie thought about Sienna's transformation from ambitious paralegal to sophisticated criminal mastermind. The timeline did seem remarkably fast. "Even if that's true," she said, "you still made choices. You still betrayed me." "I did, and I've regretted it every day since." "Have you?" Because from where I was sitting, you seemed pretty happy about your new life. Ryan's composure cracked for the first time since she had arrived. "Happy, Maddie. I haven't been happy since the day I found out you lost the baby." The baby. They had never talked about the miscarriage, never acknowledged what they had lost together. "I wanted that child," Ryan continued. "I know I said terrible things, but I was scared. I was already in so deep with Sienna, and the idea of having to choose between my old life and my new one terrified me. So you chose for all of us. I chose wrong, and when you lost the baby, I realized what I had thrown away. But by then, it was too late. Sienna had too much on me. She knew about the client information, about the financial transfers. She could have destroyed me. So you decided to destroy me instead." She decided, I just went along with it. Maddie studied Ryan's face, looking for signs of deception. He looked genuinely remorseful, but then again, he had always been a good actor. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because Sienna's going to turn on me. Her lawyer has been in contact with federal prosecutors. They're offering her a plea deal in exchange for testimony against me. And you want me to, what, feel sorry for you? I want you to know the truth. about who she really is, about what she's capable of, and I want you to be careful. Careful of what? She blames you for everything that happened. In her mind, if you had just accepted the divorce quietly, none of this would have happened. She sees you as the reason her perfect plan fell apart. Her perfect plan is falling apart because she committed federal crimes. Ryan, not because of anything I did. I know that, but she doesn't see it that way. And Sienna is very good at holding grudges. A guard appeared at the door, signaling that visiting time was over. I have one more thing to say, Ryan said as they both stood up. I loved you. I know I showed it badly, and I know I destroyed it. But what we had in the beginning was real, at least for me. Maddie looked at him for a long moment. This man who had been her husband, her partner, her destroyer. I loved you too, she said finally, but love wasn't enough to save you from yourself. She walked out of the detention center into the gray February afternoon, thinking about weakness and choices and the different ways people respond to pressure. Ryan had chosen to be weak, Sienna had chosen to be predatory, and Maddie had chosen to be strong. In the end, that made all the difference. 6 months later, Maddie was standing in the cabin of Jack's private jet, watching the city shrink beneath them as they climbed toward 30,000 feet. The prosecuting attorney called this morning, Jack said, pouring champagne into crystal glasses. Sienna took the plea deal. She'll testify against Ryan in exchange for 15 years instead of life. And Ryan, life in federal prison. No possibility of parole. Maddie accepted the champagne but didn't drink it immediately. Through the jet's windows, she could see the lights of Manhattan spread out below them like a circuit board. Where are we going? She asked. Singapore. You have a resort to finish designing. The Morrison Marina Bay Resort had been her first project as head of global development for Morrison Tech. After 2 years of planning and construction, it was finally ready for its grand opening. The president of Singapore will be there, Jack continued, along with about 300 of the most important people in international business. It's going to be the event of the year. Maddie settled into the leather seat across from him, thinking about how far she had traveled from that parking lot where he had found her living in her car. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met in college? She asked. All the time. I probably would have been just another tech billionaire with more money than sense. You probably would have rebuilt your life anyway, just taken longer. I'm not so sure about that. I am. You're the strongest person I've ever met, Maddie. What Ryan and Sienna did to you would have destroyed most people permanently, but you turned it into fuel. The jet climbed higher, past the cloud layer, into clear sky that stretched endlessly in all directions. I got a letter from Sandra Walsh yesterday, Maddie said. She's being released next month. Sandra, her mentor from federal prison, had become one of the first recipients of a grant from the Morrison Foundation. Her plan was to start a consulting firm that helped other white-collar crime victims rebuild their lives. The foundation has approved grants for 12 more women this quarter, Jack said. Women who lost everything to financial fraud, domestic manipulation, corporate malfeasance. They're all getting second chances. Third chances, in some cases, however many chances it takes. Maddie thought about the women she had met through the foundation. A doctor whose husband had stolen her practice, a teacher whose business partner had embezzled their startup funds, an engineer whose ex-boyfriend had destroyed her credit and her security clearance. All of them had stories that echoed her own: betrayal, destruction, and the long climb back to something resembling dignity. I want to expand the foundation internationally, she said. Women everywhere face these same problems. That's why we're building resorts in 12 countries. Morrison Tech is becoming Morrison International. And wherever we go, the foundation goes too. The jet's intercom crackled to life. Ms. Sterling, Mr. Morrison, we're approaching our cruising altitude. Flight time to Singapore is 18 hours. 18 hours to circle half the globe, to travel from the site of her destruction to the place where she was building something new. Maddie raised her champagne glass. To second chances. To taking them and making them count, Jack agreed. As they flew through the night, crossing time zones and continents, Maddie thought about the woman she had been 5 years ago. Naive, trusting, willing to sacrifice her own ambitions for someone else's dreams. That woman was gone, not destroyed but transformed. In her place was someone harder, smarter, more careful about who she trusted, but also someone more powerful, more confident, more aware of her own worth. The woman she had become would never live in her car again, would never let someone else define her value, would never again mistake kindness for weakness or mistake love for surrender. Below them, the Atlantic Ocean stretched endlessly in all directions, dark and vast and full of possibility. Maddie closed her eyes and felt the jet carrying her toward the future she had built with her own hands, far above the wreckage of everything that had tried to keep her down. The Singapore skyline glittered like a jeweled necklace as Jack's jet descended toward Changi Airport. The Marina Bay Resort stood among the towers like a crown jewel, its glass facade reflecting the city lights and patterns that seemed to dance. "There it is," Jack said, pointing through the window. "Your masterpiece." Maddie pressed her face to the glass, looking down at the building she had designed from her prison cell library, sketched on stolen paper, and brought to life through 2 years of 18-hour days and absolute determination. The resort was everything she had envisioned and more. Towers that seemed to grow from the water itself, connected by bridges that looked like they were floating in midair. Gardens that cascaded down the sides of the building like green waterfalls. And at the top, a rooftop terrace that offered a 360-degree view of one of the world's most beautiful cities. "The president will arrive at 8, Jack said, checking his watch. "The fireworks start at midnight. In between, you get to accept credit for creating something that's going to change the skyline forever." The grand opening was everything Maddie had dreamed it would be. Dignitaries, celebrities, business leaders, and journalists from around the world, all there to celebrate not just a new resort, but a new kind of luxury travel experience. "The architect behind this project," the president of Singapore said during his speech, "represents everything we hope to achieve in international cooperation, innovation, sustainability, and the courage to imagine something that has never existed before." Maddie stood on the stage, looking out at an audience of people who represented billions of dollars in investment potential, and thought about the last time she had spoken to a crowd this influential, the Rainbow Room, 2 years ago, when she had announced her comeback to the world. That night, she had been proving that she could survive. Tonight, she was proving that she could thrive. "When I was designing this resort," she said into the microphone, "I was sitting in a federal prison, surrounded by women who had been told their lives were over. I want to dedicate this building to them, and to every woman who has ever been counted out, written off, or told that her best days were behind her." The applause was thunderous, but Maddie barely heard it. She was thinking about Sandra Walsh, now running her own consulting firm in Connecticut, about the 12 women who had received grants from the Morrison Foundation this quarter, about all the women who would benefit from the foundation's expansion into international markets, After the speeches, after the dinner, after the endless rounds of congratulations and business card exchanges, Maddie found herself alone on the rooftop terrace, looking out at the city she had helped reshape. Jack appeared beside her, 2 glasses of champagne in his hands. "Penny, for your thoughts." "I was thinking about that night at the Rainbow Room," she said. "How I thought that was the end of the story. My big comeback moment. And now I realize it was just the beginning." In the distance, she could hear the sound of fireworks being prepared for the midnight celebration. Soon, the sky would explode in colors and light, marking not just the opening of a new resort, but the launch of Morrison International's expansion into a dozen new countries. "I got a call from Ryan's lawyer today," Jack said quietly. Maddie turned to look at him. "And Ryan died in prison. Heart attack. They think it was stress-related." The news should have affected her more than it did. This was the man she had once loved, the father of the child she had lost, the person whose betrayal had set everything else in motion. "How do you feel about it?" Jack asked. "Sad," she said, and realized she meant it. Not for the man he became, but for the man he could have been, for the life we could have had if he had made different choices. And Sienna will serve her time and probably find some other way to hurt people. That's who she is. The first firework exploded overhead, a burst of gold and silver that reflected off the glass facade of the resort. "This is beautiful," Maddie said, watching the light show paint the sky in impossible colors. "Not as beautiful as you," Jack said, and when she turned to look at him, he was holding a small velvet box. "Jack, I know this is complicated," he said, opening the box to reveal a ring that was elegant and understated and perfect. "I know we started as friends, became business partners, and somewhere along the way turned into something else. I know you've been betrayed before, and I know you might not be ready to trust someone again. Jack, but I also know that I love you, not because I rescued you, not because we built something together, but because you're the strongest, smartest, most remarkable woman I've ever met, and if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life watching you change the world." Maddie looked at the ring, then at Jack, then at the city spread out below them like a promise of infinite possibility. 5 years ago, she had been living in her car, broken and alone, and convinced that her life was over. Tonight, she was standing on top of a building she had designed, looking down at a city where she was about to launch an international empire, with a man who loved her not for who she had been, but for who she had become. "Yes," she said, and when Jack slipped the ring onto her finger, it felt like the final piece of a puzzle she had been assembling for years. The fireworks continued overhead, painting the sky in celebration of everything they had built together and everything they were going to create next. In the distance, she could see lights of ships in the harbor, planes crossing the sky, the endless movement of a world that never stopped changing. And at the center of it all, 30 stories above the ground, Maddie Sterling stood with the man she loved, watching fireworks from a place she had built with her own hands, finally and completely free. The future stretched out before them like an unwritten story, full of possibility and promise, and the kind of happiness that could only be earned through surviving the worst and choosing to build something better. As the last firework faded from the sky, Maddie realized that this wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning, and this time she was the one writing the script. If this story of ultimate comeback inspired you, Smash that like button and tell me in the comments, what would you do for just to share this with someone who needs to hear that rock bottom can be the foundation for a skyscraper? And hit subscribe because we're just getting started with stories that prove your worst chapter doesn't write your ending.